The call came while I was taking dinner out of the oven. "Mrs. Collins," the woman said carefully. "I'm Margaret Sullivan, the notary handling your home purchase in Dublin." I almost laughed. I had lived in the same house for 32 years and had no intention of buying another. Then she read the last 4 digits of my social security number, my bank's name, and my current address. My hand tightened around the phone. "There must be a mistake," I whispered. A long silence followed. "Your daughter is sitting across from me," Margaret said. "She has a power of attorney, your signature." At that exact moment, Emily texted me a photograph of her family standing outside a beautiful new house. The caption read, "We finally got our dream home." Then Margaret said the words that changed everything. "Mrs. Collins, your daughter is buying this house in your name. Before I tell you what happened next, please like and subscribe if you believe trust should never be used as a weapon. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if your own child used your identity without permission? And let me know where you're watching from and whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening there. I always love knowing who is sharing these stories with me. If you had met me before that phone call, you probably would have described me as an ordinary retired woman. I wasn't wealthy by the standards of the people you see on television. I didn't own vacation homes or luxury cars. I wasn't the kind of widow who spent her retirement on cruises around the world. I simply had something that had taken my husband and me more than 30 years to build. Security. At 67, I lived alone in the same brick house in Columbus, Ohio, where my husband, William Collins, and I had raised our daughter. Every room carried memories. The hallway still had tiny scratches on the wall where Emily measured her height every birthday. The old oak tree in the backyard had a crooked wooden swing William built when she was 8 years old. Sometimes I would stand in the kitchen with my morning coffee and remember the sound of William laughing as he burned pancakes every Saturday because he insisted breakfast was a husband's responsibility. He was terrible at cooking. He knew it, but he never stopped trying. 3 years had passed since the heart attack that took him away without warning. 3 years. People often tell you that grief becomes easier with time. That isn't exactly true. You simply learn how to carry it without letting everyone else see how heavy it still is. For months after William died, I found myself setting 2 dinner plates before realizing I only needed one. I would wake up in the middle of this night convinced I had heard his footsteps coming down the hallway. Loneliness became a quiet roommate that never really left. That was when Emily stepped in. Looking back now, that's probably why I trusted her so completely. She called almost every day. "Mom, have you eaten? Mom, don't forget your doctor's appointment. Mom, I can pick up your prescriptions." She drove me to medical appointments when I didn't feel like driving. She helped me figure out online banking after I accidentally locked myself out of my account one afternoon. Whenever I received paperwork from Medicare or my pension administrator that seemed confusing, she'd come over with a cup of coffee and patiently explain every page. I remember thinking more than once that William would have been proud of the woman our daughter had become. She seemed thoughtful, responsible, kind. One Saturday morning, while we were organizing old tax documents in my study, Emily smiled and said, "Dad always kept everything so organized." I laughed. "He trusted paper more than computers." "So do you." "I suppose I do." She offered to scan my important documents so I'd have digital copies in case there was ever a fire or flood. It sounded perfectly reasonable. I thanked her. That afternoon, she carefully sorted through my homeowner's insurance policy, property tax records, copies of my driver's license, and several years of tax returns. I remember apologizing because I felt embarrassed about how many papers had accumulated over the years. She smiled. "Mom, that's what daughters are for." I believed her. There were other small things I never questioned. I gave Emily a spare key to my house shortly after William died. "If anything ever happens to me," I told her, "I don't want you breaking a window just to check on me." She hugged me. "I'll always look after you." Those words would echo in my mind many times later. Looking after me. At the time, I thought they meant love. I never imagined someone could use those same words while quietly collecting every piece of information needed to steal my identity. Emily also knew the passwords to a few harmless accounts. Nothing major, I thought. Just the utility website, the online pharmacy, the grocery delivery service. Whenever I couldn't remember a password, she'd reset it for me. "It'll make life easier," she'd say. And it did, until it didn't. My grandson Ethan was 14 by then. He was the brightest part of every week. Every Sunday afternoon, he'd ride his bicycle over to my house, park it beside William's old gardening shed, and burst through the back door shouting, "Grandma, are you making your pot roast today?" Even if I wasn't, I usually started making it anyway. He loved hearing stories about his grandfather. Sometimes we'd sit on the back porch for hours while I told him how William proposed to me during a thunderstorm because he couldn't wait another day. Ethan would laugh every single time. "I wish Grandpa was still here." "So do I." "I think he'd still beat me at chess." "Oh, absolutely." "He cheated." "He absolutely did not." "He definitely cheated." We'd laugh until neither of us could remember why we had started. Those afternoons reminded me that family was still something beautiful, which is why everything that happened afterward hurt so much. Jason Parker. Emily's husband had always impressed people when they first met him. He dressed well, spoke confidently, remembered everyone's names. He worked in residential real estate and seemed to know everything about housing markets, mortgage rates, and investment opportunities. Whenever he visited, he called me Mom. "How's my favorite mother-in-law today?" It sounded warm, natural, even affectionate. I never saw the calculation hiding behind the charm. Over the past 2 years, however, I noticed subtle changes. Emily complained more often about money. "The rent keeps going up." "Ethan deserves a better school district." "We're throwing money away every month." Jason always had an explanation. "The market's crazy." "We're waiting for the perfect opportunity." "The banks have become impossible." One evening over dinner, Jason leaned back in his chair and sighed. "If only we could qualify for a larger mortgage." Emily looked down at her plate. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Finally, Jason smiled. "You know, with your excellent credit, Mom, getting approved would probably be easy." I looked at him. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "Oh, nothing complicated." He waved his hand dismissively. "You could co-sign. We'd make every payment ourselves. It would only help us get approved." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I looked toward the framed photograph of William sitting on the bookshelf. It had become a habit whenever I faced an important decision. William had always believed in helping family, but he also believed something else. Never gamble the roof over your head. "I'm sorry," I said gently. "I can't put this house at risk." Jason smiled politely. "I understand." Emily reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "It's okay, Mom. We never wanted you to feel pressured." I felt relieved. I thought the conversation had ended. To ease my own guilt, I offered another idea. "I can help with your rent for a while if things are tight." Emily immediately shook her head. "No, we don't want your money." I smiled proudly. What wonderful children, I thought. They weren't asking for handouts. They simply wanted a chance. Looking back now, I realize something that still keeps me awake some nights. The conversation about co-signing wasn't the end of their plan. It was only the moment they learned they would have to do it without my permission. By the time I finished washing the dinner dishes that evening, I had completely forgotten Jason's request. Unfortunately, he hadn't forgotten my answer. People often ask me if there was a single moment when I realized something was wrong. I always tell them the same thing. No, there wasn't one moment. There were dozens of little moments. Tiny warnings, small, uncomfortable feelings, questions I asked myself for only a second before convincing myself I was imagining things. The truth is that betrayal rarely arrives like a thunderstorm. It comes quietly, one drop at a time, until one day you realize you've been standing in the rain all along. About 2 months before Margaret Sullivan called me, I noticed that my mailbox seemed unusually empty. I live in a neighborhood where everyone still checks the mail every afternoon. It had become part of my routine since retirement. I'd walk down the driveway, wave at my neighbor across the street, open the mailbox, and usually find a few advertisements, a utility bill or something from my pension administrator. But for almost 2 weeks, there was hardly anything. At first, I thought nothing of it. Maybe companies were sending more emails these days. Maybe it was just a slow month. Then one afternoon, my next-door neighbor Linda called over the fence. "Rebecca, did you get that property tax reminder yet?" I frowned. "No. I got mine 3 days ago." I smiled politely. "Maybe mine's running late." That evening, I mentioned it to Emily during one of our phone calls. "That's strange," she said. "Maybe the mail carrier accidentally delivered it somewhere else. It just seems odd. It happens more often than you think, Mom." She sounded so calm, so certain. By the end of the conversation, I had stopped worrying. A week later, another strange thing happened. While checking my email, I found a notification saying a credit inquiry had been made using my information. I stared at the screen. I hadn't applied for a loan. I hadn't opened a credit card. I hadn't financed a car. I barely used my credit anymore. The notification included a customer service number. Before calling, I decided to ask Jason. After all, he worked in real estate. Maybe inquiries like this happened more often than I realized. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom." I received something strange. "What happened?" "I got an alert saying someone checked my credit." Jason chuckled. "Oh, that's probably nothing." "Nothing. Insurance companies do soft credit pulls all the time. Sometimes banks refresh old records too. So I shouldn't worry. Not unless you're seeing new accounts opened." His answer came so quickly. Too quickly. But at the time, I was grateful someone understood these complicated financial matters better than I did. "Thank you. Anytime." When I hung up, I deleted the email. I wish I hadn't. A few days later, Emily stopped by after work carrying 2 coffees. I was already in the neighborhood. She kissed my cheek. We spent nearly an hour talking about Ethan's school projects and William's old vegetable garden. As she was getting ready to leave, she hesitated. "Mom, could I borrow your driver's license for a day?" I looked up. "My license?" "Yeah." "For what?" "The hospital is updating emergency contact records. They want identification because I'm listed as the person who can make medical decisions if something ever happens." That sounded perfectly reasonable. After all, she had been driving me to appointments ever since William died. I handed her my wallet. She removed the license carefully. "I'll bring it back tomorrow." She smiled exactly the way she always had, the smile of a daughter helping her mother. She didn't return it the next day, or the day after that. Nearly a week passed before I remembered. When I called her, she apologized immediately. "Oh my goodness, Mom, I completely forgot." She returned it that evening. I noticed nothing unusual. No scratches, no damage, no reason to suspect it had been copied several times. Another week passed. Emily came over on a rainy Saturday afternoon carrying a folder. "I need one quick favor." "What is it?" "The hospital updated their paperwork again." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "They're impossible." She placed several pages on my dining room table. "If you're ever unconscious, they'll need permission to speak with me." I barely glanced at the documents. My mind was somewhere else. The following week marked William's birthday. Even after 3 years, that date always left me emotional. Emily gently slid a pen toward me. "Just sign at the bottom." I signed. She flipped another page. "And here." I signed again. One more, then another. She gathered everything neatly. Thank you. I should probably start reading these things more carefully. She laughed. You trust me, don't you? Without thinking, I answered. With my life. For a split second, her smile changed. It disappeared almost immediately, so quickly that I wondered if I had imagined it. But later, when I replayed every memory in my mind, I remembered that expression. It wasn't gratitude. It looked almost like relief. One afternoon, about 3 weeks before Margaret's phone call, I walked into William's old study looking for gardening gloves. The room had barely changed since he passed away. His drafting table still stood beneath the window. His favorite fountain pen rested beside an unfinished crossword puzzle. I wasn't ready to move anything. As I reached for the closet door, I froze. Jason was standing beside William's filing cabinet. He had several documents spread across the desk. He looked startled when he saw me. Oh, I didn't hear you. What are you doing? I asked. He smiled. Emily said these old papers should probably be scanned. I walked closer. On the desk lay my property deed, property tax statements, the original mortgage satisfaction letter from years earlier, several insurance documents. Jason quickly stacked everything together. I figured digital copies would be safer. I nodded slowly. I suppose that's true. Still, something didn't feel right. Why would anyone need copies of every document related to my house? I almost asked. Instead, I remained silent. I didn't want to sound suspicious, especially toward family. As Jason walked toward the front door, he casually asked, Have you ever thought about selling this place? I laughed softly. No, never. I promised William I'd stay here as long as I could. He nodded. It's worth a lot now. I'm sure it is. You could make a fortune. I don't need a fortune. Jason smiled politely. Fair enough. He left a few minutes later. That evening, I sat alone in the living room thinking about the conversation. Something inside me whispered that none of it made sense. Emily, borrowing my license, missing mail, the credit inquiry, Jason photographing every document connected to my home, questions about selling. Each event by itself seemed harmless. Together, they formed a picture I refused to see. Instead, I made excuses. Emily loves me. Jason is just trying to help. They're under financial pressure. Don't become one of those older people who distrusts everyone. Then another memory surfaced. Just days earlier, Emily had casually asked, Mom, have you ever looked at retirement communities? I laughed. I'm not ready for one of those. They're actually really nice. I'm happy right here. She smiled. I was just thinking ahead. At the time, I believed she was worried about my future. Now I know. She wasn't wondering where I wanted to live. She was trying to find out how easily I might leave the home they were already planning to take from me. I ignored every warning because I loved my daughter more than I trusted my instincts. That would become the most expensive mistake of my life. I stood in my kitchen with the phone pressed so tightly against my ear that my fingers began to ache. For several long seconds, neither Margaret Sullivan nor I spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock William had insisted on repairing instead of replacing. Tick, tick, tick. Finally, I found my voice. There has to be some mistake. I wish there were, Margaret replied quietly. My legs suddenly felt weak. I lowered myself into the nearest chair before I collapsed. You said, my daughter is there. Yes. And she's trying to buy a house. Yes. In my name? Margaret hesitated before answering. Yes, Mrs. Collins. I closed my eyes. No. Emily wouldn't do that. She couldn't. Not the little girl who used to cry because she accidentally broke a neighbor's flower pot. Not the teenager who saved her allowance for months to buy me a Mother's Day necklace after William lost his job during the recession. Not my Emily. There must be another Rebecca Collins. Margaret spoke gently. I verified your information before calling. She slowly repeated my full legal name, my current address, my date of birth. Then she read the last 4 digits of my social security number. Every detail was correct. Every single one. I felt the blood drain from my face. How? I whispered. How did they get all of that? I don't know. My breathing became shallow. I stood and walked toward the kitchen sink, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. I need you to explain exactly what's happening. Margaret took a slow breath. I'm a notary public assigned to today's real estate closing. Your daughter and her husband arrived about 40 minutes ago. My daughter introduced herself. Yes. What did she say? She said you weren't feeling well and had authorized her to sign on your behalf using a durable power of attorney. My stomach tightened. I never signed a power of attorney. I understand. There isn't one. I believe you. Those 3 words caught me by surprise. You believe me. I do. Why? There was another brief silence. Because something didn't feel right. I swallowed hard. What do you mean? Margaret's voice became more professional, almost as though she were giving testimony. When I reviewed the documents, I noticed several inconsistencies. What kind? The signature on the power of attorney doesn't match the signature on your driver's license copy. My heart skipped. It doesn't. No. Not even close. It resembles your signature enough that many people wouldn't question it. But you did. Yes. I leaned against the counter. Why? I've been doing this job for more than 20 years. She paused. People can copy the shape of a signature, but they usually can't copy the rhythm. I didn't understand. The rhythm. When people sign their own names, there's confidence in the movement. What did you see? Hesitation, she continued. The letters were correct. The spacing was close. But whoever signed it stopped several times, as though they were copying instead of writing naturally. I looked toward the framed photograph of William sitting on the bookshelf. He always joked that my signature looked exactly the same whether I was happy, angry, or exhausted. Apparently, someone else's version didn't. Margaret continued. There was something else. What? The date. What about it? The power of attorney was supposedly signed 6 weeks ago. I tried to remember. 6 weeks. Then it hit me. I wasn't even in Columbus. I'm sorry. I was in Cincinnati. For what? My annual heart specialist appointment. I remembered because Emily had driven me. We had spent nearly the entire day there. There was no possible way I had signed legal paperwork in another city. I have medical records proving where I was. I suspected as much. My breathing became a little steadier. At least one lie had already begun to fall apart. Did Emily say anything? Margaret sighed. She seemed nervous. Nervous? Very. Jason did most of the talking. That didn't surprise me. He answered questions directed at her. He interrupted several times. He kept checking his watch. And every few minutes, he reminded everyone they were running late. I could picture him perfectly, confident, impatient, always believing pressure could force people to make quicker decisions. What about Emily? She barely looked at me. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Margaret continued softly. She kept twisting her wedding ring. She avoided eye contact whenever I asked about you. I closed my eyes. That was exactly what Emily did whenever she lied as a little girl. William used to tease her about it. You don't have a poker face, he'd say. You always play with your ring. Even after all these years, some habits never changed. I asked if I could speak with you directly. What did they say? Jason immediately gave me a phone number. I frowned. My number? I don't know. You didn't call it? No. Why not? She answered without hesitation. Because something told me not to. Instead, she searched public property records and older legal documents until she located another contact number associated with me. The number she called was my real cell phone. If she had trusted the number Jason provided, I never would have known any of this until the closing was finished. A chill ran down my spine. Could I speak with Emily? Margaret hesitated. I can ask. Please. I heard muffled voices. Footsteps. A chair scraping across the floor. Then, Mom. Emily sounded frightened, not guilty, frightened. What are you doing? Silence. Emily. I was going to explain. When everything was finished, she started crying. It isn't what you think. Then tell me what it is. We needed a house. So you stole my identity. No. We were going to fix everything. What does that even mean? The bank wouldn't approve us. My heart sank. So you used me. We were only borrowing your credit. Borrowing, as though someone's identity were a lawnmower you returned after the weekend. I never gave you permission. I know. Then why? Another long silence. Finally, she whispered, because I knew you'd say no. Those words cut deeper than any insult ever could. She hadn't made a mistake. She hadn't misunderstood. She knew exactly what my answer would be, so she removed me from the decision entirely. We'll refinance in a year, she rushed to say. You'll never owe anything. You don't know that. We'll make every payment. What if you can't? We will. Emily, my voice broke. You forged my name. Before she could answer, another voice interrupted. Jason. He had taken the phone. Mrs. Collins. His tone was calm, too calm. You need to think about Ethan. I felt anger rising for the first time. Don't use my grandson. He deserves a better neighborhood. He deserves honest parents. Jason ignored my comment. You've got excellent credit. You own your house free and clear. This costs you nothing. It costs me everything. No. It gives your family a future. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My future matters too. You already have a home, and I intend to keep it. His voice hardened. If you stop this closing. He paused deliberately. Emily could face serious legal consequences. There it was, not remorse, not apology, a threat wrapped inside guilt, as though protecting myself made me responsible for what they had chosen to do. I looked toward William's photograph once more. For years, I had been afraid of becoming the kind of mother who disappointed her child. But standing there, I realized something. The daughter I loved had already made her choice. Now, I had to make mine. I lifted the phone back to my ear. Margaret. Yes, Mrs. Collins. My voice was shaking, but my words were clear. Do not notarize another document. I won't. Stop the closing. I already have. And whatever happens next, I took a deep breath. Please keep every piece of paperwork exactly where it is. I will. When the call ended, I remained standing in my silent kitchen. For the first time since William died, I didn't feel lonely. I felt hunted, and somehow, I knew this house wasn't the only thing they had tried to take from me. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily standing in front of a beautiful new house, smiling as though she had just achieved the American dream. Then I heard Margaret's voice again. Your daughter is buying this house in your name. By 3 o'clock in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep. I made a cup of chamomile tea that went cold before I took more than 2 sips. My mind kept replaying every conversation I'd had with Emily over the past year, searching for the exact moment my daughter had become someone I no longer recognized. At 7:30 sharp, I was standing outside the law office of David Reynolds. David had represented William and me for nearly 25 years. He had helped us update our wills after Emily got married, handled the paperwork when William retired, and stood beside me after my husband passed away, making sure every legal detail was taken care of while I could barely think straight. If there was one person I trusted to tell me the truth, it was David. His receptionist recognized me immediately. Mrs. Collins, Mr. Reynolds is expecting you. When I stepped into his office, David stood and walked around his desk instead of waiting for me to come to him. Rebecca. He gently squeezed my shoulder. You look exhausted. I am. He waited until I sat down before asking another question. Margaret Sullivan called me late yesterday. I looked up. She did. She was deeply concerned. I don't even know where to begin. Start with what she told you. For the next 20 minutes, I explained everything. The phone call, Emily, Jason, the forged power of attorney, the house, the photograph. David didn't interrupt me once. He simply took notes in neat handwriting, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he opened a thick legal folder that had already been placed on his desk. Margaret sent copies of the documents she was legally allowed to provide. He slowly turned the folder toward me. I want you to prepare yourself. I nodded. I am. No, he said softly. I don't think you are. The first page showed a glossy photograph of a 2-story brick home in Dublin, Ohio. It was beautiful. White columns, a 3-car garage, large windows overlooking a landscaped front yard. For one brief second, I understood why Emily had wanted it. Then I looked at the purchase price. $487,500. My mouth went dry. Oh my God. David didn't speak. He allowed me to absorb the number. The next page listed the borrower. I stared at the name for several seconds. Rebecca Ann Collins. My own name, my own date of birth, my own social security number. Everything belonged to me, except I had never seen the document before. I turned another page. Borrower, Rebecca Collins, primary purchaser. Rebecca Collins, responsible for repayment. Rebecca Collins. Emily and Jason's names appeared only as future occupants, not owners, not borrowers, occupants. I felt sick. If this loan goes unpaid, David finished the sentence, the lender comes after you. My pension, potentially. My savings, potentially. My house. He looked directly into my eyes. If necessary. The room suddenly felt smaller. I had spent decades paying off my mortgage. William and I sacrificed vacations. We postponed buying new cars. We clipped coupons. We worked overtime. We celebrated the day we mailed our final mortgage payment by eating hamburgers because that was all we could afford after years of making extra payments. Now, with a few forged signatures, someone had tied my home to nearly $500,000 in debt. I pressed both hands against the edge of David's desk. There has to be some mistake. I wish there were. He slid another document toward me. This explains the down payment. I frowned. $92,000. Yes. Emily doesn't have that kind of money. No. Jason certainly doesn't. No. So, where did it come from? David pointed to another line. Do you recognize this account? I shook my head. I've never seen it. You have? I have. It's yours. I stared at him in confusion. No. I've never opened that account. You didn't. He opened another folder. This is a home equity line of credit. I still didn't understand. David continued carefully. Rebecca, they opened a line of credit using your house as collateral. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My house. Yes. The house I've already paid off. Yes. They borrowed against your equity. My vision blurred. I reached for a tissue before I realized tears were already running down my face. No. I worked 32 years to pay that house off. I know. We finally owned it. I know. It belonged to William. I know. David let me cry. He didn't rush me. He didn't tell me everything would be okay, because neither of us knew whether it would. When I finally collected myself, he handed me another document. The power of attorney. I examined it carefully. At first glance, it looked convincing. My name, my address, my signature. But once I looked closely, I saw what Margaret had noticed. The letters looked stiff, almost copied. My real signature always flowed. This one looked like someone had drawn each letter separately. I didn't sign this. I know. There are witnesses. We're already verifying them. The notary seal? David shook his head. The commission number doesn't exist in the state's database. So the entire document appears fraudulent. Another wave of nausea hit me. Then David placed a printed email in front of me. This account approved several electronic disclosures. The address looked strangely familiar. Rebecca Collins? I frowned. That isn't my email. No. It looks like mine. Exactly. Someone had added an extra letter to my address, close enough that a busy loan officer might never notice. Every notification, every disclosure, every approval had gone to an account I didn't even know existed. They planned this. David met my eyes. Yes. This wasn't impulsive. No. This took weeks. Probably months. I leaned back in my chair. The realization hurt even more than the forged signature. This wasn't one desperate decision made under pressure. This had required preparation. Copies of documents, fake email accounts, forged signatures, financial applications. Someone had spent months building a life in my name while smiling across my dinner table every Sunday. David quietly closed one folder before opening another. There's one more thing. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. He handed me a tablet. Watch this. The screen showed me. At least, it looked like me. I was sitting in what appeared to be my own living room. The woman on the screen smiled calmly. I understand the loan documents and I authorized this transaction. I stared in horror. I never said that. I know. But that's my face. David nodded. It is. I've never recorded this. don't believe you did. He paused the video. Look closely. He enlarged my mouth. The movement seemed wrong, almost delayed, as though the words and lips didn't quite belong together. What am I looking at? We don't know yet, but I strongly suspect this video has been manipulated. I covered my mouth with trembling hands. Someone had taken my face, my voice, my identity, and turned them into evidence against me. David leaned forward. I've already contacted a digital forensics specialist. You think they can prove it's fake? I believe so. I looked down at the frozen image of myself on the screen. I had never felt so violated. It wasn't just my name anymore. They had stolen my face, my voice, my credibility, every part of me that the bank would trust. I whispered the question I had been avoiding since yesterday. David? Yes. Do you think Emily knew about all of this? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he folded his hands together. I don't know. But I think we need to prepare ourselves for an answer we may not want. I closed my eyes. Until that moment, a small part of me still believed Jason had manipulated everything while Emily simply followed along without understanding. But as I looked at the fake email, the forged documents, the fabricated video, I began to fear something far worse. This wasn't the work of one dishonest man. It looked like the work of two people who knew me well enough to build an entire financial life around my identity. And for the first time, I wondered whether my daughter had been lying to me for much longer than I could bear to imagine. I spent the next 2 days surrounded by paperwork instead of memories. David Reynolds filed emergency notices with the lender, contacted the title company, and instructed every institution involved to freeze whatever they legally could while the investigation began. Margaret Sullivan provided a written statement explaining exactly why she had stopped the closing before the final notarization. For the first time since William died, my dining room table was no longer covered with family photographs or crossword puzzles. It was covered with evidence. Every sheet of paper seemed determined to prove that my own daughter had built a new life using my name. Yet despite everything, one thought kept returning. Maybe Emily would still tell the truth. Maybe she would finally admit she'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe she would look at me and say the words every mother hopes to hear. Mom, I'm sorry. Instead, she called 3 times that morning. I let every call go to voicemail. Then Jason called. I ignored him too. By lunchtime, David looked up from his desk. Rebecca. Yes. I know you want answers. I do. And I also know you're thinking about going to see them. I didn't answer. He already knew. I can't stop you. I just need to hear it from her. I understand, but don't go alone. I won't. He offered to send someone with me. I shook my head. No. This is something a mother has to do herself. He sighed. If anything feels unsafe, leave immediately. I promise. That afternoon, I drove to the address printed on the purchase contract. The neighborhood looked exactly like the kind of place Emily had always dreamed about. Wide sidewalks, beautiful maple trees, children riding bicycles without a care in the world. Every lawn looked professionally maintained. As I slowly turned onto the street, I immediately recognized the house from the photograph Emily had texted me. It looked even larger in person. Fresh landscaping, a stone walkway, white shutters. The front porch was decorated with flower pots that hadn't been there 2 days earlier. Someone was already trying to make it feel like home. My stomach twisted. I parked across the street for a moment. I watched through the windshield as Emily carried a cardboard box through the front door. Jason followed behind her, talking on his cell phone. He looked relaxed, confident, as though nothing had happened, as though my entire world hadn't fallen apart. I stepped out of my car. My legs felt strangely heavy as I walked toward the front porch. Before I could knock, the door opened. Emily froze. Her face turned pale. "Mom." For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she quietly stepped aside. "Come in." The house smelled of fresh paint and new carpet. Boxes were stacked everywhere. A brand new dining table sat in the middle of the room. Family photographs already rested on the fireplace mantel. I noticed something that made my heart ache. One of those photographs was taken in my own backyard. William stood beside me with one arm around Emily when she graduated from college. They had brought my family memories into a house they bought with my stolen identity. I looked around slowly. "It's beautiful." Emily lowered her eyes. "I know." "Did you ever stop to think whose name made this possible?" She didn't answer. Instead, tears filled her eyes. "I never wanted it to happen like this." "Then how did you want it to happen?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. A moment later, Jason walked into the living room. He smiled the instant he saw me. "Rebecca." Not Mom. Rebecca. Apparently, I had been demoted. "I wasn't expecting you." "I imagine not." He walked toward the kitchen as though we were discussing the weather. "Can I get anyone coffee?" I stared at him. "My name is attached to nearly $500,000 in debt. You forged legal documents. And you're offering me coffee?" He shrugged. "Getting emotional won't solve anything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Emily spoke first. "Jason?" He raised one hand without looking at her. "I've got this." No. He thought he did. Jason sat casually at the kitchen island. "You've misunderstood the situation." "I've misunderstood my own signature." "No. You've misunderstood our intentions." I folded my arms. "Then explain them." He leaned forward confidently. "We were always going to refinance." "When?" "Within a year." "What if you couldn't qualify?" "We would." "That's not an answer." "It is." "No. It's a prediction." He smiled patiently, almost as though he were explaining finances to a child. "The housing market is going to increase. We'll build equity. We'll refinance. Your name comes off. Everybody wins." I looked at Emily. "Is that what you believed?" She nodded slowly. "Jason showed me the numbers." I asked what you believed. Her shoulders dropped. I wanted to believe him. I turned back toward Jason. "And if the refinance failed?" "It wouldn't. And if it did, it won't." "You don't know that." He remained silent. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. I took another step closer. "My retirement. My savings. My credit. My house. You risked all of it." Jason spread his hands. "But you weren't actually going to lose anything." I stared at him in disbelief. "You don't know that." "We've never missed a mortgage payment. You've never had one this large." "We'll manage." "With what income?" Emily suddenly spoke. "We've been struggling." Jason shot her a sharp look. She immediately stopped talking. That single glance told me more than any document David had shown me. Jason wasn't simply leading the conversation. He was controlling it. I looked directly at Emily. "Tell me the truth." Silence. "Emily." She began crying. "We couldn't get approved." "I know." The bank rejected us twice. I know. Jason said your credit was perfect. I know. We were going to give it back. The sentence echoed through the room. We were going to give it back. As though my identity were a borrowed sweater. As though my home equity were something you checked out from a library. I could hardly recognize my daughter's voice anymore. What exactly were you giving back? My name. My retirement. My peace? Emily covered her face. I know how it sounds. No, I don't think you do. Jason stood up. Rebecca, I think you're being unfair. I laughed. Actually laughed. It wasn't because anything was funny. It was because I couldn't believe the word he had chosen. Unfair. You forged my signature. You used my social security number. You opened debt against my home. And somehow, I'm the unfair one. His expression hardened. You already own a house. I felt something inside me finally snap. So, because I have one, you decided you deserved two. No. You didn't need all that equity. There it was. The truth. Not desperation. Entitlement. He believed he had the right to decide how much security I needed. He believed that because I was older, because William was gone, because I lived alone, I should quietly hand over everything we'd spent a lifetime building. Emily reached for my hand. Mom! I stepped back before she could touch me. Her face crumpled. That hurt me almost as much as everything else. But I couldn't let her comfort me for a wound she had helped create. Then Jason delivered the sentence I would never forgive. If you report this, he looked directly into my eyes. Emily could go to prison. I remained silent. And Ethan will lose his mother. Emily gasped. Jason! He ignored her. You really want your grandson growing up without his parents. There it was. The guilt, the manipulation, the attempt to make me responsible for consequences they had created. I looked at Ethan's school photograph sitting on the mantel. I loved that boy more than words could describe. Jason knew it. He was counting on it. I slowly turned back toward them. I will always love Ethan. My voice remained calm. But I will not teach him that stealing from family has no consequences. Emily sobbed. Jason's jaw tightened. For the first time since I arrived, neither of them had an answer. As I walked toward the front door, Emily called after me. Mom! I stopped, but didn't turn around. I never wanted to hurt you. A tear rolled down my cheek. Maybe not. I opened the door. But every single day, you had another chance to stop. And every single day, you chose not to. I walked out without looking back. As I reached my car, my cell phone rang. It was David. I've just received something from the bank. My heart sank. What is it? His voice became unusually serious. Rebecca? I think we just discovered this house wasn't the only property they planned to take. The drive back to David's office felt longer than it actually was. Every traffic light seemed to last forever. Every stop sign gave me another moment to replay what Emily had said. We were going to give it back. She had spoken those words as though they erased months of planning, as though borrowing someone's identity without permission became acceptable if you intended to return it someday. The more I thought about it, the more I realized something. Emily had never apologized for what she did. She had only apologized for getting caught. When I arrived at David's office, he was already waiting for me. His expression told me the news wasn't good. Come in. I followed him into the conference room. Several folders lay open across the large oak table. Beside them sat a man in his early 50s, wearing rectangular glasses and a navy suit. David stood beside him. "Rebecca, this is Michael Grant." Michael extended his hand. "I'm a digital forensic analyst." I shook it quietly. David motioned for me to sit. "Michael has been examining the video submitted to the lender." "The one with my face?" "Yes." I looked toward the large monitor mounted on the wall. The frozen image stared back at me. It still felt surreal. I knew it wasn't me, yet it looked exactly like me. Michael picked up a remote. "I'm going to show you several sections. The differences are subtle. They're designed to fool ordinary viewers." He pressed play. There I was, sitting in what appeared to be my own living room. Calm, smiling, speaking directly toward the camera. "I understand the mortgage documents and voluntarily authorize my daughter to act on my behalf." Michael paused the recording. "Now watch the mouth." He enlarged the image. "This frame." He advanced it slowly. "This one." The movement looked strange. My lips seemed to lag behind the words by a fraction of a second. Barely noticeable. But once I saw it, I couldn't stop seeing it. "That's not how people naturally speak," Michael explained. He continued playing. Again, he paused. "This section is even more obvious." He highlighted the edges of my face. "There are tiny inconsistencies around the jawline. The software blending isn't perfect." I looked away from the screen. "So, someone made this?" "Yes. They used existing footage of you." David leaned forward. "Michael believes they combined several different recordings." I stared at him. "What recordings?" Michael opened another folder. "We've identified one source." He clicked again. A home video appeared. I immediately recognized it. William's 65th birthday. The entire family had gathered in our backyard. Emily had insisted on recording everyone saying something special for William. The camera eventually stopped on me. "I love you," I had said to my husband. "I hope we grow old together in this house." I felt tears sting my eyes. That memory had been one of the happiest days of my life. Now it had been turned into evidence against me. Michael continued. "The facial movements in the mortgage video come from this birthday recording. So they cut pieces together." "Exactly. And the voice," he opened another audio file. "This came from a voicemail." I listened carefully. "Hi, sweetheart, it's Mom. I'll be home around 5. Love you." It was my voice. A message I'd left for Emily years earlier. Then another recording. Then another. My voice saying individual words. "I understand. Authorize. Mortgage. Yes. Everything." Michael turned toward me. "Someone collected numerous recordings of your voice over several years. They stitched them together digitally. So, the words in the mortgage video were never actually spoken by you." I covered my mouth. Emily had helped me transfer photographs and videos from my old cell phone to a new one nearly 2 years earlier. She had copied every family memory onto her laptop, every voicemail, every birthday, every holiday, every conversation. I whispered, "She had access to all of it." David nodded slowly. "We believe so." Michael displayed another document. "This is even more interesting." On the screen appeared technical data. Dates, times, computer identifiers. "This metadata shows where the edited file originated." David looked at me. "It came from Jason's desktop computer." For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt something different. Not grief, not disbelief. Anger, real anger. Because this wasn't desperation anymore. This was planning. Careful, patient, deliberate. Michael continued. "However, There is something else. What? The account that uploaded the video? He typed a few keys. An email address appeared. Emily. Parker. My heart sank. So, Jason edited it? Yes. But Emily submitted it. Michael nodded. That's what the evidence currently suggests. I closed my eyes. Until then, a part of me had continued searching for excuses. Maybe Jason had forged everything without telling her. Maybe Emily believed the paperwork was legitimate. Maybe she signed something she didn't understand. Those hopes disappeared one by one. She had uploaded the final video herself. David quietly pushed another folder toward me. This came from Margaret Sullivan. Inside was Margaret's written statement. I read every word. She described the closing meeting in careful detail. Emily had appeared nervous. Jason answered nearly every question. Whenever Margaret questioned the signature, Emily insisted there was no problem. Then I reached one sentence that made my hands begin to shake. Mrs. Parker stated that her mother had recently become forgetful and sometimes confused legal paperwork. I read it again, then a third time. Forgetful, confused. I looked up at David. They were trying to make people think I couldn't remember things. Yes. If I denied signing, they already had an explanation prepared. My throat tightened. Emily hadn't simply stolen my identity. She had started destroying my credibility. If anyone questioned the forged documents, she would simply tell them her elderly mother couldn't remember signing. I suddenly remembered something. 3 months earlier, Emily had asked an odd question while driving me home from a doctor's appointment. Mom, have you ever forgotten where you were driving? I laughed. No, not even once. No. Why? Oh. She smiled. I was reading an article about memory loss. At the time, I thought she was making conversation. Now I realized she had been collecting information, testing stories, building a picture. David interrupted my thoughts. Rebecca, yes, I need to ask you something difficult. I nodded. Has Emily ever encouraged you to move into assisted living? The question hit me immediately. Yes. More than once. When? Over the past year. What exactly did she say? I thought carefully. She'd mention retirement communities. Safer neighborhoods. Places where someone could check on me every day. David wrote several notes. Anything else? She kept asking whether maintaining the house was becoming difficult. Were you having trouble? No. I mow my own lawn. I clean my own house. I still drive. I volunteer twice a week. David leaned back slowly. I don't think those conversations were casual. Neither did I anymore. One frightening realization followed another. The questions, the copied documents, the missing mail, the fake video, the story that I was becoming forgetful. None of these things stood alone. They fit together, like pieces of a puzzle that had only one purpose: to convince the world that Rebecca Collins could no longer protect herself. Michael gathered his papers. I'll continue examining every digital file. If additional evidence exists, I'll find it. After he left, David remained unusually quiet. Finally, he closed the last folder. I've been practicing law for 36 years. I looked at him. I've handled inheritance disputes, divorces, business fraud, identity theft. He paused. But I've rarely seen family members prepare this thoroughly. I swallowed hard. So, what does that mean? David looked directly into my eyes. It means I don't believe buying that house was their final objective. A cold chill spread through my body. If it wasn't, what was? David slid one final document across the table. It wasn't a mortgage. It wasn't a deed. It was a notification from the county recorder's office. There appears to be activity, he paused, involving the title to your current home. I stared at the document. My heart began pounding again, because I suddenly understood something terrifying. The house they bought in my name may never have been the real prize. For a long moment, I simply stared at the document David had placed in front of me. My name appeared at the top. My address, the legal description of my property, the home William and I had spent more than 30 years paying for. I could barely force myself to ask the question. What does activity involving the title mean? David folded his hands. It doesn't necessarily mean ownership has changed, but it does mean someone has been preparing documents related to your property. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Preparing them for what? We don't know yet. But I don't want to make assumptions until we receive the complete file. I nodded slowly, trying to calm myself. For nearly a week, I had been reacting emotionally to every new discovery. Now I realized something had to change. Fear wasn't protecting me. Action would. David slid a legal pad across the table. We're going to make a checklist. A checklist. Yes. Today, we stop reacting. We start protecting you. It was the first time since Margaret's phone call that I felt even a small sense of control. David began writing. First, we freeze your credit with every major credit bureau, so no one can open another account. I nodded. Second, we change every password connected to your finances. Bank accounts, investment accounts, email, retirement portals, insurance, everything. I had never considered myself particularly good with computers. William had always handled most of those things. After he passed away, Emily became the person I relied on whenever technology confused me. Now, every password she had safe. David continued. Third, we notify every financial institution that you may be the victim of identity theft. Fourth, we revoke every authorization you've ever given anyone. I looked at him. Even Emily, especially Emily. Those words hurt. Far more than I expected, because somewhere deep inside me, I still wanted to believe I could fix this. That if I found the right words, the right conversation, the right amount of love, everything could somehow return to the way it used to be. David seemed to read my thoughts. Rebecca. Yes. I know she's your daughter. I know. But right now, she's also someone who has demonstrated she cannot be trusted with your personal information. I closed my eyes. He was right. Knowing that didn't make accepting it any easier. The rest of the afternoon became a blur of phone calls. I spoke with my bank first. The fraud specialist listened carefully while I explained what had happened. When she asked whether anyone besides me had access to my online banking, I hesitated. Yes. My daughter helped me after my husband died. Does she still have access? I honestly don't know. We recommend changing everything immediately. Within the next hour, every password I'd used for years disappeared. New usernames, new security questions, new authentication methods. Every digital door Emily had once been trusted to open was now locked. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I wasn't just changing passwords. I was changing boundaries. After the bank came the investment company, then my pension administrator, then my homeowner's insurance provider. Each conversation forced me to repeat the same painful sentence. I believe my daughter has stolen my identity. Every time I said those words, they felt more real, and somehow more unbelievable. Late that afternoon, David accompanied me home. He stood quietly while a locksmith replaced every exterior lock on my house. I watched as the old key that Emily had carried for years no longer fit. The locksmith handed me 2 brand new keys. Keep the spare somewhere safe. I held both keys in my hand. There would be no spare key for Emily anymore. At least not until she earned trust she had thrown away. When the locksmith left, I walked through every room in the house. For the first time in decades, I locked every window, checked every door, moved William's important papers into a fireproof case. David arranged for the original documents to be stored temporarily in his firm's secure vault. As we loaded the box into his car, I rested my hand on top of it. Inside were our marriage certificate, the deed to the house, William's will, family photographs, documents that represented an entire lifetime. I never imagined I'd have to protect these from my own child. David looked at me with genuine sadness. No parent ever does. That evening, my cell phone rang. Emily. I stared at her name until the call ended. 30 seconds later, she called again, then again, then again. By the 6th call, she left a voicemail. "Mom," she was crying, "please answer. We need to talk. I know you're angry. But Jason says—" The recording stopped. Jason says, "Not, I think. Not, I'm sorry," Jason says. I deleted the voicemail without listening again. 5 minutes later, another message arrived. A photograph. It showed Ethan sitting on the edge of a bed, surrounded by moving boxes. The caption read, "He's asking why Grandma hates us." I felt my heart shatter. It was exactly the kind of message I knew Emily never would have sent before. Not because she wasn't capable of guilt, because she knew how deeply it would hurt me. For nearly 10 minutes, I stared at the photograph. Then I placed the phone face down on the kitchen table. I refused to answer. Not because I didn't love Ethan, but because I finally understood something. Every time I gave in to guilt, someone else gained control over me. The next morning, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed Ethan's name. I answered immediately. "Grandma." His voice sounded small. 12 years old. Scared, confused. "I'm here, sweetheart." Did I do something wrong? The question nearly broke me. No, never. Dad said you're trying to take our house away. I closed my eyes. I chose every word carefully. This isn't your fault. I don't understand. I know. I wish you didn't have to hear any of this. There was silence. Then he asked, "Are you still my grandma?" Tears rolled down my cheeks. "Oh, Ethan. I will always be your grandmother, no matter what happens. I love you. I love you too. He hesitated. "I don't like it when Mom and Dad fight." Neither did I, but I couldn't tell him the truth. Not yet. Children should never become weapons in adult battles. "Ethan, yes. No matter what anyone tells you, you are not responsible for fixing grown-up problems. Okay? And none of this changes how much I love you." I know. When the call ended, I cried harder than I had since William's funeral. David happened to arrive a few minutes later with additional paperwork. He found me sitting at this kitchen table. "I just talked to Ethan." He nodded quietly. "I figured you might." "He thinks I hate them." "No. He thinks you're hurting." He handed me a tissue. "You did the right thing." "I don't feel like I did." "That's because you're used to fixing everyone's problems." I looked at him. "And I can't fix this." "No, you can't. You didn't create it." For the first time, I understood the difference. All my life, I'd believed being a good mother meant sacrificing until everyone else was happy. Now I realized something painful. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to rescue someone from the consequences of their own choices. Just as David gathered his briefcase to leave, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His expression changed instantly. "What is it?" I asked. He slowly looked up. "The county recorder finally released the additional documents." I stood. "What do they say?" David took a slow breath. "They weren't just preparing paperwork for the house in Dublin." He paused. "They were preparing paperwork to sell this house." He looked around my living room. "The one you're standing in." My knees nearly gave out beneath me, because in that moment, I realized they hadn't just planned to borrow my name. They had planned to erase my entire life. I don't remember sitting down. One moment, I was standing in my living room, staring at David Reynolds. The next, I found myself on William's old armchair, with my hands trembling so badly that I couldn't hold my coffee cup. I looked around the room. The grandfather clock William inherited from his father stood quietly in the corner. The quilt my mother had sewn lay folded over the back of the couch. Family photographs lined the mantel. Every object represented a chapter of my life, and someone had planned to sell all of it. Not after I died, not after I chose to move, while I was still living here. David carefully opened another folder. "I need you to prepare yourself." "I don't think this is everything." I laughed bitterly. "I've heard you say that 3 times this week." "I'm afraid it keeps being true." He handed me the first document. At the top in bold letters were the words "Exclusive Right to Sell Listing Agreement." My name appeared beneath the title, or rather, a version of my name. The signature looked similar enough to fool someone who wasn't paying attention. But after seeing the forged power of attorney, I immediately recognized the hesitation in the strokes. It wasn't mine. "This was never filed," David said. "Fortunately. But it had already been prepared." I slowly turned the page. The asking price stopped me cold. $642,000. I whispered. William would have laughed. David looked confused. "He always said this house would never be worth more than $200,000. I smiled sadly. He would have been amazed. Then the smile disappeared. "They were going to sell it." David nodded. "Yes. And according to these documents," he pointed to another page, "you had already agreed to move." I frowned. "Move where?" He slid another document across the table. It was a brochure. A retirement community nearly 40 miles away. Beautiful landscaping, private apartments, dining hall, medical staff, group activities. Everything looked comfortable, respectable, except for one thing. I had never seen the place before. "I never asked about this." "I know." David handed me another sheet. This one hurt even more. It was a typed statement supposedly signed by me. "I have decided that maintaining my current home has become physically and emotionally difficult. My daughter, Emily Parker, has generously agreed to help manage my financial affairs while I transition into assisted living." I stared at the page in disbelief. "I never wrote this." "No. I never even thought this." "I know." "I still mow my own lawn." "I know." "I still shovel snow." "I know." "I volunteer twice every week." "I know." The anger in my voice surprised even me. "I don't need anyone deciding where I should live." David remained calm. "Exactly." I continued reading. The next paragraph claimed I wished to simplify my life by selling my home and allowing Emily to oversee the proceeds for future healthcare expenses. I almost laughed. Healthcare expenses. The phrase sounded responsible. practical, even loving. But after everything I'd learned, I knew exactly what it really meant. Control. Complete financial control. I placed the paper back on the table. Where did they get this? The county recorder's office found it attached to a preliminary title package. So, someone intended to file it? Yes. Very soon. My stomach tightened. What would have happened if Margaret hadn't called me? David looked directly into my eyes. I believe the purchase of the Dublin house would have closed. He paused. Then, within weeks, they likely would have listed this property for sale. I slowly looked around my living room again. The walls suddenly felt different. Not because the house had changed, because I now knew how close I had come to losing it. I imagined strangers walking through my home during open houses, looking into my bedroom, opening closets, commenting on the kitchen where William and I had celebrated every Christmas, negotiating over the dining room where Emily blew out birthday candles every year. The thought made me physically ill. David quietly placed another document before me. This one concerns me the most. Across the top it read, Physician Observation Summary. I frowned. I've never seen this. You haven't. The document claimed I was experiencing increasing memory loss, difficulty managing finances, occasional confusion, reduced ability to make complex decisions. Halfway down the page, another sentence caught my eye. Family members have expressed concern regarding the patient's declining cognitive abilities. I slammed the paper onto the table. This is a lie. Yes. I've never been diagnosed with dementia. I know. I've never failed a cognitive assessment. I know. So where did this come from? David adjusted his glasses. We've already contacted the physician whose electronic signature appears on the document. What did they say? He never wrote it. A wave of relief washed over me. So it's fake. It appears to be. But he pointed towards several handwritten notes in the margins. These details didn't come from nowhere. I leaned closer. The notes mentioned recent cardiology appointments, blood pressure medication, previous knee surgery, dates, medical terminology, specific information that wasn't publicly available. I felt another chill. They knew all of this. David nodded. Someone did. Then I remembered. After William died, Emily had helped organize every medical folder in my house. Insurance forms, prescription lists, specialist reports. She had insisted everything should be easier to find in an emergency. I had thanked her. Now those same records had apparently become tools against me. I covered my face with my hands. She used my own medical history. David didn't answer. He didn't have to. The evidence spoke for itself. I suddenly remembered another conversation. About 8 months earlier, Emily had invited me to lunch. Out of nowhere, she asked, Mom, if you ever couldn't take care of yourself, would you want me making decisions for you? I laughed at the time. I suppose that's why people have children. She smiled. I'd always take care of you. Back then, I heard love. Now, I heard planning. David broke the silence. There's one more financial projection. I looked up. He handed me a spreadsheet. Someone had carefully outlined every step. Step 1. Purchase the Dublin property. Step 2. Open home equity line of credit. Step 3. Sell Rebecca Collins' residence. Step 4. Pay off the home equity loan. Step 5. Use remaining proceeds toward the new mortgage. Below those calculations sat another estimate. Projected remaining equity after all debts, approximately $260,000. Enough to leave Jason and Emily with a dramatically smaller mortgage, using my lifetime of savings. I stared at the page for several long seconds. They had reduced my life to numbers. 32 years of hard work. William's overtime shifts. Our sacrifices. Our dreams. Reduced to a financial strategy. The realization hurt almost more than the forgery itself. Because this wasn't a desperate decision made in panic. This was a business plan. A carefully calculated roadmap. One that happened to require destroying my independence. David quietly closed the folder. Rebecca, I need to ask you something. What? Has Emily ever suggested you were becoming forgetful in front of other people? I thought carefully. Then my heart sank. Yes. When? At Thanksgiving. What happened? I couldn't remember where I'd put my reading glasses. Emily laughed and said, I stopped speaking. What did she say? I whispered the words I suddenly wished I had challenged months earlier. Mom's memory isn't what it used to be. Everyone at the table had laughed, including me. I thought it was harmless. Now I realized it had been the beginning of a story they intended the world to believe. And somewhere inside me, a terrifying question began to grow. If they were willing to forge documents, fake medical records, and convince people I was losing my mind, how many others had already believed them? I didn't sleep at all that night. Not because I was afraid someone would break into my house. I was already living with the knowledge that the people I had trusted most had walked through my front door for months while quietly planning to take everything from me. That kind of fear doesn't disappear when you lock the doors. It follows you into every room. The next morning, David Reynolds called before 9. Rebecca, I'd like you to come to my office. Did they find something else? Yes. His voice sounded different, not urgent, not frightened, almost thoughtful. There's something your husband left with me. I frowned. William? Yes. He instructed me to keep it sealed unless a very specific situation occurred. My heart skipped. What situation? If anyone ever attempted to gain control of your property through deception or coercion. I stared out the kitchen window. William. Even after 3 years, he was somehow still protecting me. Less than an hour later, I was sitting across from David once again. This time, there wasn't a stack of mortgage documents waiting for me. Instead, there was a single cream-colored envelope. My name was written across the front in William's unmistakable handwriting. For Rebecca, only if you ever need this. My fingers trembled as I touched it. I've never seen this before. You weren't supposed to. David leaned back in his chair. William gave it to me about 6 months before he passed away. I looked up in surprise. He never told me. He asked me not to. Why? David was quiet for several seconds. I think he didn't want to worry you unless he was right. I swallowed hard. Right about what? David opened another folder. It started with Jason. Of course it had. David continued. William came to see me after Jason asked several unusual questions. What kind of questions? The value of your house, the amount of equity remaining, whether property could be transferred before someone's death. I felt my stomach tighten. I remembered those conversations. At the time, Jason had laughed them off. He claimed he was simply curious because of his work in real estate. William hadn't believed him. David continued. Your husband wasn't accusing anyone of a crime. He simply said, David glanced down at his notes, that Jason seemed unusually interested in assets that didn't belong to him. That sounded exactly like William. He never rushed to conclusions, but he always trusted his instincts. I smiled sadly. He noticed things I missed. He often did. David wasn't criticizing me. He was simply stating the truth. William had spent 40 years working as a construction engineer. His job required him to spot tiny structural weaknesses before they became disasters. Apparently, he approached people the same way. David continued. William told me something I'll never forget. He opened a notebook. I wrote it down immediately after our meeting. He adjusted his glasses and began reading. If anything ever happens to me before Rebecca, please remind her that kindness is a strength. But kindness without boundaries becomes an invitation. I felt tears fill my eyes. That sounded exactly like my husband. He always admired my generous heart. He also worried people would someday take advantage of it. David continued reading. Rebecca believes family always deserves another chance. She's probably right. But I hope she remembers that another chance should never require surrendering her independence. I covered my mouth. I could almost hear William's voice saying those words. David closed the notebook. He loved you very much. I know. And he worried about you. I know. He wasn't afraid you'd be alone. I was afraid someone would mistake your kindness for weakness. The room fell silent. Finally, David slid the sealed envelope toward me. I think you're ready. Very carefully, I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. William's handwriting hadn't changed. Strong, steady, confident. The first line immediately blurred through my tears. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then something happened that made David believe you needed one last piece of advice from me. I smiled sadly. Even from beyond the grave, William still knew exactly how to begin a conversation. I continued reading. You have always believed that loving people means trusting them. I hope life never proves you wrong. But if it does, remember that protecting yourself isn't the same as giving up on love. A tear landed on the page. I wiped it away carefully. The next paragraph hurt even more. I love Emily with all my heart. She is our greatest blessing. But I have begun to notice something that worries me. She no longer questions Jason the way she used to. She follows him even when her own instincts seem uncomfortable. I looked at David. He noticed. David nodded quietly. I believe he did. I kept reading. I pray I'm simply being an overprotective father. I hope one day you'll laugh while reading this because nothing ever happened. But if I'm right, please don't confuse guilt with love. Your job isn't to save everyone. Your job is to live the life we built together. By then, I could barely see the page. Every sentence sounded as though William were sitting beside me. One final paragraph caught my attention. I asked David to place an additional verification requirement on any future transfer involving our home. I looked up immediately. What does that mean? David smiled for the first time in days. It means your husband insisted that any future sale or ownership transfer involving your property required direct verification from both you and my office. So when someone later attempted to begin preparing title work, the system flagged it. I suddenly understood. The warning hadn't stopped Emily and Jason from trying, but it had slowed them down. Just enough, long enough, for Margaret Sullivan's phone call to happen first, without William's precaution. The timeline might have been very different. I lowered my head. Even after his death, my husband had quietly placed one last hand on my shoulder. David wasn't finished. There was something else. He opened another envelope. This wasn't in William's handwriting. Inside was a photocopy of a torn sheet of paper. It was recovered from documents your husband left in his desk. I frowned. It looks incomplete. It is. Only part of the page remained. Most of it had been torn away. But one sentence was still readable. If Rebecca ever asks about transferring ownership, the was missing. I looked at David. What happened to the rest? We don't know. Then another memory surfaced. After William's funeral, Emily had volunteered to organize his study. She spent nearly 2 full days alone in that room, sorting papers, cleaning drawers, throwing away old junk. At the time, I was too overwhelmed to help. Now, my breathing slowed. Emily. David watched my face carefully. What? She cleaned William's office. When? Right after the funeral. He nodded slowly. I suspected that. I looked down at the torn page. You think she found this? I think it's possible. You think she knew Dad had concerns? I think she may have. The realization broke something inside me. Not because Emily had ignored William's warning, because she had hidden it from me. If she found that letter, if she read even part of it, she knew exactly what her father feared, and she chose to continue anyway. I carefully folded William's letter and placed it back inside the envelope. I spent weeks asking myself where I failed as a mother. David remained silent. I kept wondering what I should have done differently. Another tear rolled down my cheek. But after reading this, I looked toward William's handwriting one last time. I think maybe neither of us failed. David nodded. No, I think someone simply made a terrible choice. I took a deep breath. For the first time since this nightmare began, I stopped blaming myself. But before I could say another word, David's office phone rang. He answered. His expression changed almost immediately. When he hung up, he looked directly at me. Rebecca? What is it? Emily just called. My heart pounded. What did she want? David hesitated. She says she wants to meet you. Alone. For several seconds, neither David nor I spoke. Emily wanted to meet me. Alone. After everything that had happened, I should have refused immediately. Instead, I found myself asking the one question only a mother would ask. Did she sound frightened? David nodded. More frightened than defensive. I looked down at William's letter resting on the desk. He had warned me not to confuse guilt with love. I repeated those words silently. Not because I intended to forgive Emily, but because I needed to remember why I was going. I wasn't going there to rescue my daughter. I was going to hear the truth. If I meet her, I said, it won't be at her house. Good. And not at mine. Even better. David thought for a moment. There's a cafe across the street from the courthouse. Plenty of people. Security cameras. Neutral ground. I agreed. If she wants to talk, that's where we'll meet. The following afternoon, I arrived 15 minutes early. The cafe was quiet. Older couples sat near the windows. A college student worked on a laptop in the corner. A waitress smiled politely as she poured me coffee. I chose a table where I could clearly see both the entrance and the parking lot. My hands were steady. That surprised me. A week earlier, I had been terrified of confronting Emily. Now, I simply wanted answers. At exactly 2 o'clock, the door opened. Emily walked inside. For a moment, I barely recognized her. She wore no makeup. Her hair, usually carefully styled, had been pulled into a loose ponytail. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. She looked exhausted. Not because life had been unfair, because lies eventually become too heavy to carry. She saw me immediately. For several seconds, she simply stood there. Then she slowly walked toward my table. Hi, Mom. I nodded. Sit down. She sat across from me without ordering anything. Neither of us spoke. Finally, Emily whispered, I don't know where to start. The truth. She nodded. Okay. Another long silence passed. Then she surprised me. Jason owes more money than I told you. I waited. He lost almost everything. How much? Emily looked down at the table. Over $400,000. I stared at her. How? He kept investing in developments that never happened. He borrowed more money hoping the next deal would fix the last one. When it didn't, he borrowed again. I felt sick. So he was desperate. Yes. But that still doesn't explain you. She closed her eyes. I know. When did he first mention using my name? Emily answered almost immediately. About 9 months ago. 9 months? Yes. I leaned back in my chair. 9 months. 9 months of family dinners. Birthday celebrations. Sunday visits. 9 months of smiling across the table while planning to steal from me. What exactly did he say? Emily swallowed hard. He said the bank loved your credit. He said older people often help their children buy homes. I said you'd never agree. So we should ask. Emily shook her head. He said asking would only guarantee you said no. My heart tightened. So the decision was made before anyone even spoke to me. Yes. She couldn't even look at me anymore. He convinced me it would only be temporary. I remembered Jason saying exactly the same thing. Temporary. The favorite word of dishonest people. What happened after that? Emily took a deep breath. At first, it wasn't supposed to be this. What does that mean? He only wanted to use your information to see if you'd qualify. A pre-approval. I frowned. And then, when it worked, he said we'd already come this far. So one more step wouldn't matter. She laughed bitterly. Every time I hesitated, there was always just one more step. I listened without interrupting. First, I copied your driver's license. I told myself it wasn't hurting anyone. Then, I sent Jason your social security information. I told myself we still hadn't actually borrowed money. Then, I scanned your tax returns. I told myself the lender only needed paperwork. She began crying. Every bad decision made the next one easier. I quietly asked, and the power of attorney. Emily closed her eyes. I knew it was fake. Those 6 words settled over the table like concrete. There would be no more pretending, no more excuses, no more misunderstanding. You knew. Yes. And you still signed the closing documents. Yes. I looked out the cafe window for a moment, not because I wanted to escape, because I needed a second to absorb what I'd just heard. When I turned back toward her, she looked even smaller somehow. I kept thinking we'd fix everything before you found out. I shook my head slowly. No. You kept hoping I would never find out. She didn't argue, because she knew I was right. After another long silence, I asked the question that mattered most. The video. Emily covered her face. I helped. How? I gave Jason copies of the family videos, my voicemail backups, the recordings from Dad's birthday. I felt tears sting my eyes. You used the videos your father loved. She nodded. I know. I know how horrible that is. Do you? She looked at me, really looked at me. I do now. No. You knew then. She lowered her head. You're right. Another painful silence followed. Finally, she whispered, I wanted that house. I blinked. She continued before I could speak. I wish I could tell you I only did it because of Jason. But that wouldn't be true. I waited. I was tired of renting. I was embarrassed. My friends were buying beautiful homes. They posted pictures online. They talked about renovations. They hosted parties. I kept feeling like we'd failed. She wiped away fresh tears. When Jason showed me that house, I wanted it. Those words hurt almost as much as the fraud itself. Not because she admitted wanting the house, because she finally admitted wanting it more than she respected me. I kept telling myself we'd refinance. I kept telling myself you would never actually lose anything. She looked at me desperately. I believed it. I spoke quietly. You believed what you wanted to believe. She nodded. Yes. I looked at my coffee. It had gone cold, much like every comforting illusion I'd held onto about my daughter. Then another question came to mind. Dad's letter. Emily froze. She stopped breathing for a moment. You knew. She slowly nodded. I found part of it. When, the week after the funeral, my heart sank. What did you do? I read enough to know Dad didn't trust Jason. And then, I tore off the page. You destroyed it. I thought, she started crying again. I thought if you read it, you'd never help us. I stared at my daughter, the woman William and I had raised, the little girl who once cried because she'd accidentally stepped on a butterfly, now admitting she had hidden her father's final warning. Not because she misunderstood, because it stood in the way of what she wanted. I closed my eyes. When I opened them again, Emily reached into her purse. I brought something. She placed an old cell phone on the table. Jason's. I copied everything before he realized. I looked at her. What is it? Text messages. Emails. Voice recordings. What kind? She slid the phone toward me. The kind that prove this was his plan from the beginning. I didn't touch it. Instead, I asked one final question. Why now? Emily looked directly into my eyes. For the first time since we'd sat down, I didn't see excuses. I saw fear, real fear. Because, she whispered, Jason doesn't know I kept those messages. And if he finds out, she couldn't finish the sentence. I suddenly realized this meeting wasn't only about confession. Emily wasn't just afraid of losing me anymore. She was afraid of her own husband. I quietly picked up the phone. David needs to see this. She nodded. I know. As I stood to leave, Emily spoke one last time. Mom. I stopped. I don't expect you to forgive me. I looked at her for several long seconds. Then I answered honestly. Forgiveness isn't what we're talking about anymore. It's responsibility. I turned and walked toward the exit. The phone felt surprisingly heavy in my hand. Somewhere inside it were the messages that could finally expose Jason Parker. But I had no idea. Those same messages would also reveal something Jason had been planning behind Emily's back all along. I drove straight from the cafe to David Reynolds' office. I didn't stop at home. I didn't stop for gas. I didn't even turn on the radio. Jason's phone sat in my purse the entire drive, and every time I glanced at it, I felt as though it carried the weight of my entire family. David was waiting when I arrived. The moment he saw the phone, he stood. Is that it? I nodded. Emily gave it to me. He looked genuinely surprised. Voluntarily? Yes. He closed his office door. Let's see what she risked to bring us. Within an hour, Michael Grant, the digital forensic analyst, arrived with specialized equipment. He carefully connected the phone to his computer. I'm making a forensic copy first. No one's touching the original. David looked at me. If these messages are authentic, They could become critical evidence. I sat quietly while lines of data slowly appeared across the monitor. Thousands of text messages, emails, call logs, photographs, financial records. Michael searched Jason's conversations. It didn't take long. There. He clicked on a message thread between Jason and an unknown contact saved only as R. The first message appeared on the screen. Jason, her credit score is over 820. We use her profile first. Another message. Will she agree? Jason, doesn't matter. Emily knows where all the paperwork is. I felt the air leave my lungs. There was no misunderstanding, no confusion. This had been intentional from the beginning. Michael continued scrolling. Another message appeared. Jason, once the loan closes, we'll deal with the old house. The words old house made my stomach tighten. David leaned closer. Keep going. A few minutes later, another conversation appeared. This one was between Jason and Emily. Emily, Mom will never forgive us. Jason answered less than a minute later. She doesn't need to know until everything is finished. By then, it will be too late. My hands began shaking. Michael silently continued searching. Then he stopped. I think you need to see this. It wasn't a text. It was a document. A draft titled Housewarming Guest List. Jason had created a detailed plan for a celebration the weekend after closing. Neighbors, business associates, real estate investors, friends, even several of Emily's cousins. He intended to introduce the house publicly as if it had been purchased honestly. David frowned. He was creating legitimacy. I looked at him. What does that mean? The longer people believed they genuinely owned the house, the harder it would become emotionally and legally to unwind everything. Another folder appeared. This one contained invitations, professional photographs of the property, catering estimates. Everything had already been paid for. The party was scheduled for Saturday, only 3 days away. David looked thoughtful. Interesting. What? I don't think Jason knows the lender has officially frozen everything. He doesn't. No. The investigation is confidential. A slow realization spread across the room. Jason still believed he could convince everyone that nothing was wrong, including potential investors, including his own relatives. David suddenly picked up the phone. I need to make a call. He stepped into the hallway. When he returned 10 minutes later, his expression had changed. I've spoken with the bank's investigation department, and they've decided to deliver formal notice in person. At the party? He nodded. They believe there's value in preventing Jason from making additional false representations. I stared at him. So, they're actually going? Yes. And we're going with them. Saturday afternoon arrived much sooner than I expected. I almost didn't go. Every instinct told me to stay home. But David reminded me of something William once used to say. The truth doesn't become easier because you avoid looking at it. At 3 o'clock, David and I arrived outside the house. Luxury cars already lined both sides of the street. Music drifted from the backyard. Children laughed near an inflatable bounce house Jason had rented for the neighborhood kids. From the outside, it looked like the perfect family celebration. No one would have guessed it was built on forged signatures. As we approached the front door, a woman smiled warmly. You must be Jason's mother-in-law. I forced a polite smile. Something like that. Inside the house buzzed with conversation. Emily stood near the kitchen island greeting guests. When she saw me, the color drained from her face. Jason turned a moment later. His confident smile disappeared instantly. Rebecca. He walked toward me quickly. What are you doing here? I came because this concerns me. He lowered his voice. Now isn't the time. No. I think it is. Several nearby guests began watching. Jason forced another smile. Everyone, this is my mother-in-law. He emphasized the words as though normal introductions could erase reality. Before anyone could continue the conversation, the front door opened again. Margaret Sullivan walked inside. She carried a leather portfolio beneath one arm. Jason froze. What is she doing here? Margaret answered calmly. I was invited. David stepped forward. So was I. Jason's confidence began slipping. His eyes darted around the room. Then, two professionally dressed investigators from the lender entered behind us. The music continued playing. Most guests hadn't noticed anything yet. One investigator approached Jason. Mr. Parker. Yes. We need to speak with you regarding the mortgage transaction associated with this property. Jason forced a laugh. Can this wait? No, it cannot. Several conversations stopped. People turned toward us. Jason glanced at Emily. She looked terrified. Trying to regain control, Jason raised his voice. This is all a misunderstanding. He pointed toward me. My mother-in-law has been very confused lately. The room became silent. There have been memory issues. I felt the words hit me like ice. He was actually doing it, exactly as David predicted, trying to convince everyone that I couldn't be trusted. Jason continued confidently. She's been forgetting things. She's vulnerable. David calmly stepped beside me. No. He said only one word, but the authority in his voice silenced the room. Margaret opened her portfolio. I am the notary assigned to this transaction. She looked directly at everyone gathered. I refused to complete the closing because Mrs. Rebecca Collins was never present. The room erupted into whispers. Jason immediately interrupted. That's not true. Margaret didn't even look at him. I personally contacted Mrs. Collins using a verified phone number because I believed the documentation presented to me was fraudulent. The whispers grew louder. Jason pointed toward me. She's lying. Before anyone could respond, David calmly removed another folder. This property is currently under formal investigation for suspected mortgage fraud and identity theft. Complete silence. I looked toward Emily. Tears streamed down her face. Jason turned to her. Say something. She didn't move. Emily. His voice became sharper. Tell them your mother approved everything. Every eye in the room shifted toward her. I held my breath. For one terrifying second, I thought she might lie again. Instead, Emily slowly reached into her purse. She removed a flash drive. Then she looked directly at one of the investigators. I have copies of Jason's messages. The room exploded with shocked voices. Jason stared at her in disbelief. What are you doing? Emily's hands trembled. I'm done lying. Face changed completely. The charming smile vanished. The polite businessman disappeared. For the first time, everyone in the rooms saw the man I had finally begun to recognize. You stupid! He stopped himself just in time. Too late. Everyone had heard enough. Emily handed the flash drive to the investigator. It contains everything. Jason lunged one step toward her. You betrayed me. Emily looked at him through tears. No. I stopped betraying my mother. No one spoke. Not me, not David, not Margaret, not the investigators. The silence itself was louder than any argument. Then the lead investigator looked at Jason. Mr. Parker, I advise you not to make any further statements until you've spoken with legal counsel. Jason slowly looked around the room. His neighbors, his friends, his investors, his relatives, every person he'd invited to admire his success, had just watched it collapse. But Nuss realized that the flash drive Emily had surrendered contained one final surprise. A file Jason never intended anyone to see. No one moved. The music had stopped. Someone quietly turned off the television in the family room. Children were being guided into the backyard by confused parents who didn't want them witnessing what was unfolding. The beautiful house Jason had fought so hard to obtain no longer looked like a dream home. It looked like a crime scene. The lead investigator accepted the flash drive from Emily without saying a word. "Thank you, Mrs. Parker." Jason took a step toward them. "That drive proves nothing." The investigator remained calm. "We'll determine that." David lightly touched my elbow. "Rebecca, let's give them room." I nodded. For the first time in days, I wasn't shaking. I was simply watching the truth begin to catch up with the lies. The following Monday, David called me before breakfast. "They've finished reviewing the first batch of evidence." "What did they find?" "Quite a lot." An hour later, I sat in his conference room once again. Michael Grant was already there, along with 2 investigators from the Lender's Fraud Division. One of them opened a thick binder. "Mrs. Collins, the messages Emily provided were authentic." I closed my eyes for a brief moment. I expected they would be. But authenticity alone wasn't enough. We needed evidence connecting Mr. Parker directly to the forged documents. I looked at the investigator. "Did you find it?" He exchanged a glance with Michael. "Yes." Michael connected his laptop to the monitor. We recovered multiple versions of the forged power of attorney. The screen displayed 6 nearly identical documents. Version 1, Version 2, Version 3. Each signature looked slightly different. "He practiced," I whispered. Michael nodded. "Dozens of times." "He scanned your genuine signature, then repeatedly traced it until he believed it looked natural." I felt sick. He hadn't forged my signature once. He had rehearsed it over and over until he believed he could become me. Michael opened another folder. "We also recovered the design file for the counterfeit notary seal." The image filled the screen. It matched the fake seal on the power of attorney almost perfectly. It was created on Jason Parker's desktop computer. David folded his arms. "So the fake seal didn't come from anyone else?" "No. It originated with him." The investigator turned another page. "Now, we'd like to show you something we believe Mr. Parker intended as his protection." He placed a single document in front of me. At first glance, it looked like a handwritten confession. The title read, "Statement of Responsibility." Emily's signature appeared at the bottom. I frowned. "What is this?" the investigator answered. "We believe Jason prepared it weeks ago." I began reading. "I, Emily Parker, accept full responsibility for using my mother's financial information without my husband's knowledge." I stopped. "My husband's knowledge," the investigator nodded. "The document claims Jason believed every signature was genuine." I looked up in disbelief. I was planning to blame everything on Emily. "Exactly," David sighed quietly. "I suspected as much." The investigator continued. "The file creation date is nearly 3 weeks before the closing. So, he prepared his escape before the fraud was even completed." My heart broke all over again. Jason hadn't merely manipulated my daughter. He had planned to sacrifice her if anything went wrong. Emily arrived later that afternoon to answer additional questions. She looked exhausted. She sat across from the investigators without saying a word until they showed her the document. The moment she saw her signature, she froze. "I remember this." One investigator leaned forward. "When did you sign it?" Emily wiped her eyes. "Jason said it was just another lender disclosure." You didn't read it. She shook her head slowly. He handed me a stack of papers. He pointed where to sign. I trusted him. The irony hung in the room. She had trusted the wrong person, just as I had. The investigator asked another question. Did Mr. Parker ever tell you why he wanted this document? Emily nodded faintly. He said lenders sometimes requested extra explanations. Did you believe him? I wanted to. Then she looked at me. I'm so sorry, Mom. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to punish her, because this wasn't the moment for forgiveness. This was the moment for truth. Michael displayed another piece of evidence. This may be the most important file we recovered. It was a handwritten note scanned into Jason's computer. At first, I didn't recognize it. Then Michael enlarged it. Several words had been written over and over again. Rebecca Collins, Rebecca A. Collins, my signature. Again, again, again. Hundreds of attempts. The page looked like something a child would produce while practicing cursive. Except this wasn't homework. It was preparation for fraud. Michael pointed toward the lower corner. We compared these handwritten practice sheets with notes Jason wrote during unrelated real estate transactions. Another image appeared beside it, a legitimate business document Jason had signed months earlier. Michael highlighted several characteristics. The angle of the capital letters, the spacing, the pressure on downward strokes, the unusual way he forms the letter R. Even I could see the similarities. The investigator spoke quietly. Our handwriting expert reached the same conclusion. The person who practiced forging your signature was Jason Parker. But Michael wasn't finished. We also recovered browser history. What kind? Searches. He projected a list onto the screen. Can a power of attorney be challenged after closing? How long before mortgage fraud is discovered? Can elderly parent deny signing documents? Then, one final search appeared. How to prove someone has memory problems in court. I felt a chill run through me. Every search reflected another step in the plan. Not only to steal from me, but to silence me if I resisted. The lender's investigator opened one final folder. We've traced the email account used to communicate with the bank. He placed several printed records on the table. The fake Rebecca Collins account was accessed repeatedly. From where? He pointed to an address, Jason and Emily's home. The IP address matches their residential internet service. Then he pointed to another line. The account was also accessed from Jason's office. There was no longer any room for doubt. The evidence connected everything. The forged signatures, the counterfeit seal, the fake email, the altered video, the mortgage application, the practice sheets, the internet searches. Every road led back to Jason. Several weeks later, formal legal proceedings began. The fraudulent mortgage was officially voided. The lender canceled the loan. The title company terminated the transaction. The home equity line attached to my house was closed and removed because it had been obtained through fraud. My credit reports were corrected. The fraud alerts remained in place for additional protection. For the first time since Margaret's phone call, I could finally breathe. But one issue remained. Emily. She hadn't created the plan. She hadn't forged every document. Yet she had participated willingly. She had copied my identification, uploaded the fabricated video, submitted false information, hidden William's warning. She had crossed every line that mattered. David sat beside me after one hearing. The judge will eventually consider her cooperation. I nodded. I understand. But no amount of cooperation changes what happened. No, it doesn't. I looked through the courthouse window at the people walking outside. A few weeks earlier, I would have done almost anything to protect Emily from the consequences of her choices. Now I understood something William had tried to teach me years ago. Love without accountability isn't mercy, it's permission. David gently closed his folder. Rebecca. Yes. When the court asks what outcome you want. Have you decided? I remained silent for several moments. Then I finally answered. I don't want revenge. He nodded. I believe you. But I also won't lie to save her. Outside the courthouse clock struck noon. Inside, I realized the hardest decision of my life still lay ahead. Not whether Jason should face justice. That answer had become obvious. The real question was whether I could stand in a courtroom, look at my only daughter, and tell the whole truth. The courtroom was quieter than I expected. After everything that had happened, the investigations, the lawyers, the endless stacks of documents, I had imagined something dramatic. Instead, it felt painfully ordinary. Wooden benches, a judge reviewing files, attorneys speaking in calm, measured voices. It struck me that life-changing moments rarely announce themselves with grand speeches. Sometimes they happen in complete silence. David sat beside me. You don't have to look at them if you don't want to. I know. But I will. When the courtroom doors opened, Jason entered first. He wore a dark gray suit, freshly pressed. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have mistaken him for any successful businessman appearing in court over a contract dispute. He never looked at me. Emily entered a few moments later. She looked nothing like the confident woman who had texted me a photograph of her dream home only weeks before. She had lost weight. Her shoulders were slumped. She avoided everyone's eyes. When she finally glanced toward me, she quickly looked away again. For a brief moment, I saw the little girl who used to reach for my hand on her first day of school. Then, the memory disappeared. The proceedings began. The prosecutor methodically presented the evidence: the forged power of attorney, the counterfeit notary seal, the fake email account, the altered verification video, the fraudulent home equity line, the draft documents prepared to sell my home. One by one, every piece of the plan was placed before the court. Margaret Sullivan testified first. She described the day of the closing exactly as she had described it to me. I became concerned because the signature lacked the natural characteristics I expect to see from an authentic signer. The prosecutor asked, "What did you do?" I located Mrs. Collins' verified telephone number independently and called her. "Why didn't you use the number provided?" Margaret answered without hesitation. Because my professional judgment told me something was wrong. I looked at her with quiet gratitude. One careful decision had changed the course of my life. Next came Michael Grant. He explained the digital evidence with remarkable patience. The manipulated video, the copied facial movements, the reconstructed voice, the metadata linking the files to Jason's computer. Every technical detail reinforced the same conclusion. The video had never been real. Then David testified. He described William's meeting with him months before his death. He explained the additional verification procedures William had requested for our home. Finally, he produced William's handwritten letter. The courtroom remained silent as portions of it were read into the record. Protecting yourself isn't the same as giving up on love. Those words echoed through the room. I saw several jurors quietly lower their eyes. Then it was Jason's turn. He stood confidently. At least at first. His attorney asked him a series of prepared questions. Did you ever intend to harm Mrs. Collins? No. Did you believe the documents were legitimate? Yes. Who handled the paperwork? Jason paused just long enough to make the answer appear difficult. My wife. He pointed toward Emily. I trusted her. I believed she had obtained her mother's permission. For a moment, the room felt frozen. Jason was doing exactly what we expected. He was trying to save himself. His attorney presented the signed statement claiming Emily accepted sole responsibility, the same document we had already seen. The prosecutor remained calm. Mr. Parker, is this your defense? Yes. You are an innocent husband relying on your wife's honesty. That's correct. The prosecutor nodded. Then he walked to the evidence table. I'd like to introduce Exhibit 42. Michael handed him a folder. Inside were the practice sheets, page after page of Jason repeatedly writing my signature. The prosecutor placed them before Jason. Have you ever seen these? Jason hesitated. No. The prosecutor smiled slightly. Interesting. He held up another document. This is a legitimate real estate contract completed by you 6 months earlier. Then he displayed enlarged photographs comparing the handwriting. The courtroom screens highlighted the unusual way Jason formed the capital R, the pressure marks, and the spacing between letters. The handwriting expert took the stand. After explaining the comparison process, she delivered her conclusion. In my professional opinion, the same individual who wrote these practice signatures also wrote the questioned portions of the forged power of attorney. And who is that individual? Jason Parker. Jason's expression changed for the first time. His confidence cracked. But the prosecutor wasn't finished. He introduced the internet search history, the fake email account, the metadata from Jason's office computer. Then came the text messages Emily had preserved. One message was projected onto the courtroom screen. Emily. Mom will never forgive us. Jason. She doesn't need to know until everything is finished. By then, it will be too late. Another followed. Jason. If anything goes wrong, we keep the paperwork simple. Then another. Jason, don't argue. Just sign where I tell you. Jason lowered his head. His attorney objected repeatedly. The judge overruled each objection. Finally, the prosecutor displayed one last message. The one Emily herself had never noticed until Michael recovered deleted conversations. It had been sent from Jason to the mysterious contact saved only as R. If Emily panics, I already have a signed statement putting everything on her. I'll walk away clean. The courtroom became completely silent. Even Emily stared at the screen in disbelief. Tears rolled down her face. She slowly turned toward Jason. He never looked back. For the first time, she saw the truth exactly as it was. She had never been his partner. She had been his backup plan. After a brief recess, Emily took the witness stand. She admitted everything. She admitted copying my driver's license. She admitted accessing my tax records. She admitted submitting the manipulated video. She admitted reading part of William's warning letter and destroying it. She didn't minimize her actions. She didn't blame stress. She didn't blame money. When the prosecutor asked why she had done it, she answered quietly. Because I wanted the life I thought everyone else had. And I convinced myself my mother would forgive me. Those words hurt, but at least they were honest. Weeks later, the court reached its decisions. Jason was convicted on multiple counts related to mortgage fraud, identity theft, forgery, and the use of falsified documents. Additional financial crimes uncovered during the investigation led to further charges unrelated to my case. Emily's outcome was different. The judge acknowledged her cooperation, her voluntary surrender of critical evidence, and her acceptance of responsibility. She was still held accountable. She was ordered to pay restitution. She received supervised probation. She was required to complete hundreds of hours of community service and attend financial ethics and counseling programs. No one called it an easy sentence. No one called it unfair. It reflected exactly what had happened. She had participated willingly. Then she had chosen to tell the truth before it was too late. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood slowly. The courtroom was completely still. I looked first at the judge, then at Emily, finally at everyone else. I lost money. My credit was damaged. I almost lost my home. I paused, but none of the things were the greatest loss. I turned toward Emily. The greatest loss was realizing my daughter believed my love could be used against me. Tears filled her eyes. I continued. She didn't simply ask for help. She decided I didn't deserve the right to choose. I looked back toward the judge. I'm not here asking for revenge. I'm here asking for truth. And truth requires responsibility. When I finished, I returned to my seat. Emily quietly whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom." I believed she meant it, for the first time. But I also knew something equally important. Believing an apology is sincere is not the same as pretending the damage never happened. After the hearing, Emily approached me outside the courthouse. She stood several feet away. She didn't try to hug me. She didn't ask me to fix anything. "I've signed a lease," she said softly. "A small apartment. Ethan and I are moving there." I nodded. "I found a job at an insurance office. I'm going to pay back every dollar I legally owe." Again, I nodded. Then she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Will we ever be a family again?" I took a long breath before answering. "I hope so. But hope isn't built with promises. It's built with years of honest choices." She nodded. "I understand." As she walked away, I realized something William had understood long before I did. Forgiveness isn't the same as rescue. I could choose not to live with hatred, but I could also choose never again to surrender the boundaries that protected my life. 18 months passed. People often imagine that once a courtroom makes its decision, life immediately returns to normal. It doesn't. Justice can restore legal rights. It cannot instantly restore trust. Trust returns much more slowly. Sometimes it never returns completely. I still lived in the same brick house in Columbus. Every morning, I opened the curtains William had hung years earlier and watched the sunrise spread across the backyard. The oak tree was taller. The wooden swing creaked a little more in the wind. But the house still felt like home. For a long time, I couldn't walk past William's old study without remembering everything that had happened. Eventually, I decided the room deserved a new purpose. I spent an entire weekend cleaning it. I polished his drafting table. I repaired the old bookshelf he had built with his own hands. I framed one of our favorite photographs from our 25th wedding anniversary and placed it above his desk. Then beside it, I placed another frame. Inside wasn't a family photograph. It was the final page of William's handwritten letter, the sentence I needed to read every single day. Protecting yourself isn't the same as giving up on love. Whenever doubt crept into my mind, I looked at those words. They reminded me that loving my daughter had never required sacrificing my dignity. Life slowly found a new rhythm. Instead of hiding from what had happened, I decided to use it for something meaningful. The community center, a few miles from my house, hosted monthly educational meetings for retirees. One afternoon, the director asked if I would consider sharing my experience. At first, I refused. I wasn't interested in becoming the woman whose daughter stole her identity. But after thinking about it for several days, I changed my mind. If my story prevented even one family from experiencing the same nightmare, it would be worth telling. The first meeting was attended by only 12 people. I expected polite silence. Instead, I listened to stories that sounded painfully familiar. One man admitted his grandson had opened credit cards using his social security number. Another woman confessed she had signed legal papers without reading them because her son told her they were just insurance forms. An elderly couple described receiving mysterious loan notices they couldn't explain. I realized something that day. Financial abuse inside families happened far more often than people wanted to admit. Most victims stayed silent because they were ashamed, or because they feared losing their children. I understood both feelings. At the end of every meeting, I repeated the same advice. Read every document. Protect your identity. Never apologize for asking questions. And remember, love and trust are gifts. They are never obligations. Margaret Sullivan attended one of those meetings. Afterward, she walked over and smiled. I think William would be proud of you. I smiled through unexpected tears. I hope so. She became one of my closest friends. We met for coffee at least twice each month. Neither of us talked much about the investigation anymore. We talked about grandchildren, gardening, books, the ordinary things that remind you life continues. David Reynolds also helped me update every legal document I owned. This time, nothing was left to chance. Every financial account required multiple layers of verification. Every future property transaction required direct confirmation. Every emergency contact was carefully reviewed. He even convinced me to create written instructions explaining exactly how I wanted my affairs handled if I ever became unable to manage them myself. When we finished signing everything, David smiled. I hope none of this is ever needed. So do I. But now I'm prepared. That simple sentence felt empowering. Prepared, not frightened, prepared. Emily's life changed too. She moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment with Ethan. She kept the job she had found at a local insurance office. The work wasn't glamorous, but she stayed. Month after month, she attended every counseling session ordered by the court. She completed every hour of community service. Most importantly, she stopped making excuses. When she spoke about what had happened, she no longer blamed Jason. She blamed herself. I chose every step after the first one, she told me once. I could have stopped. I didn't. Hearing those words didn't erase my pain. But they told me something had finally changed. Real accountability had begun. Our relationship remained carefully limited. We met only in public places during the first several months, then eventually at my house. Never unexpectedly, never with assumptions. Emily always called first. She never asked about my savings, never asked about my will, never mentioned inheritance, never requested copies of documents, never asked for another key. She seemed to understand that trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned. One Saturday in early spring, she came over wearing old jeans and gardening gloves. I remembered these were Dad's favorite flowers. She held up a tray of white lilies. William had planted them along the backyard fence nearly every year. Without another word, we spent the afternoon working in the garden. Digging, watering, pulling weeds. For nearly 3 hours, we talked about everything except the investigation. We remembered William's terrible jokes, his love of baseball, the way he always burned pancakes. For the first time in years, our conversation felt natural. As the sun began to set, Emily stood beside the flower bed. I think Dad would have liked this. I think he would. She looked down at the soil. I know I don't deserve another chance. I carefully set my gardening shovel aside. Emily, she looked at me. A second chance isn't something someone deserves. It's something another person chooses to give. Fresh tears filled her eyes. I understand. She didn't ask for anything more. She simply hugged me. A gentle hug, not one asking to erase the past. one acknowledging it. When she left that evening, I noticed something. She hadn't once looked toward my filing cabinet. Not once had she asked about paperwork, money, or the house. She simply came to spend time with her mother. Months continued to pass. Her actions remained consistent. Not perfect, but honest. She kept paying restitution exactly as ordered. She remained active in counseling. She volunteered with a nonprofit that educated families about financial fraud. She even shared her own mistakes publicly, warning others not to repeat them. One autumn afternoon, I opened the small drawer beside my front door. Inside lay the spare house key, the new one the locksmith had made after everything happened. I picked it up. For a long time, I simply held it in my hand. 18 months earlier, the key represented fear. Now, it represented choice. I called Emily. "Can you stop by this afternoon?" Of course. When she arrived, I invited her onto the front porch. We sat in the rocking chairs William had built years ago. The evening air carried the smell of freshly cut grass. Without saying anything, I placed the spare key into her hand. Emily stared at it, then immediately looked back at me. "Mom, I don't know what to say." "Then don't." She continued staring at the key. "I don't deserve this." "No, you don't." She looked surprised by my honesty. I smiled gently. "I'm not giving you this because you earned perfection. I'm giving it to you because you've spent 18 months proving you understand what trust actually means." She began crying. I continued. "This key doesn't give you ownership. It doesn't give you authority. It doesn't give you permission to make decisions for me. It only opens a door. And only when you're invited." She closed her fingers around it. "I understand. I know you do." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she hugged me again. This time, there were no promises, no dramatic speeches, just quiet gratitude. As I watched her walk to her car, I looked back at my home. The same house, the same porch, the same front door. Only one thing had truly changed. Years ago, I believed protecting my family meant sacrificing myself. Now I knew better. Real love doesn't require surrendering your identity. Real forgiveness doesn't erase accountability. And real healing begins the moment you stop confusing healthy boundaries with rejection. William had been right. Kindness without boundaries becomes an invitation. But kindness protected by wisdom can rebuild even the most broken relationships, not exactly as they were before. Sometimes, something stronger, something more honest, finally built on truth. Life. Lesson. If my story leaves you with one lesson, I hope it's this. The people we love should never have to earn our kindness, but they should always respect our boundaries. Being a parent does not mean giving up your identity, your financial security, or your right to make your own decisions. Love is a gift, not a legal document that gives someone permission to take what isn't theirs. Too many older adults believe saying no to their children makes them selfish. I believed that once. Now I know that protecting yourself is not an act of rejection. It is an act of self-respect. If someone asks you to sign papers you don't understand, stop and ask questions. If your financial information is being requested, verify why. If your instincts tell you something isn't right, don't silence that feeling simply because the person standing in front of you is family. Trust should be built through honesty, not demanded through guilt. I chose to forgive my daughter, but forgiveness did not erase accountability. She had to accept the consequences of her choices, And only through years of consistent actions, not promises, did we begin rebuilding our relationship. Sometimes, justice isn't about revenge. Sometimes, justice is simply keeping your home, your dignity, and your freedom to choose your own future. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story touched your heart, I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you were in Rebecca's position? Could you ever forgive Emily? Or would the betrayal be too deep to repair? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you and subscribe if you enjoy emotional family stories with meaningful life lessons. Wherever you're watching from, thank you for being here. And I hope you and your loved ones always choose honesty over convenience and love that is strong enough to respect boundaries.